Ghayat Almadhoun is our honored guest tonight. Born in a Palestinian refugee camp in Syria, son of a Palestinian father and a Syrian mother, living between Stockholm and Berlin. A poet who writes about war and crisis from a distance and from within. What happens between from a distance and from within is the torn world that Almadhoun gives a voices with rage and an incredible tenderness. His poetry asks us not to look away from atrocities of humankind, of war happening as a result of colonial ruling that Europe is certainly responsible for. That this is achieved by poetry that is at once powerful, overwhelming, and I have no other word for it, beautiful, is extremely painful and moving and puts the reader, as the poet, in an impossible position between guilt and longing, remorse and hope. Wanting to love, hating to live, hating to love, and wanting to live. Ghayat Almadhoun will speak for himself now, which is much better, and after his lecture we will have a short conversation. Welcome, Ghayat.
Good evening, everyone. I never read 40 minutes text in my life, not even in Arabic. And I hardly participate in place where I should speak in English because mostly I say no, I read poetry in Arabic. But this is not poem. And I took the risk. I would like to thank SPUI25 and Barbara for the invitation, and Maria for the introduction and the interview. So as you knew now, Pandora box. My father is older than Israel. He was just 6 months old during the Nakba in 1948. When Israel expelled my family from our home in the city of Ashkelon. Ashkelon was the only part of Gaza Strip that Israel occupied in 1948. The rest was occupied in 1967. My devastated grandparents carried their children and the keys to their house and fled into Gaza Strip, specifically to what is now called the Khan Yunis refugee camp. My grandfather died in the refugee camp a few kilometers from his house. He was only 33 years old. My grandmother raised the children on her own. And their refugee tent slowly turned into a house made of bricks and zinc sheets. When my father turned 18 in 1967, Israel occupied Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Sinai from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and small part from Jordan. Israel grew tenfold from 20,000 square kilometer to 200,000 square kilometer. The Israeli army arrested my young father and many other young men, took them on a 4-day journey through the Sinai desert to the Suez Canal. Didn't give them any food during these 4 days, with only tiny drops of water to drink. Then throw them on the Egyptian side of the canal. My father then went to Egypt, then Jordan, and ended up in Syria where he met my Syrian mother, and I was born in the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus. They left my grandmother behind. Cut. When Israel expelled my father from his homeland to Egypt after the 1967 war, they left my grandmother in the Khan Yunis refugee camp in Gaza Strip. They left her alone. and she remained alone for the rest of her life. I tried everything to get the Swedish citizenship so I could visit her and see her in Palestine before she died. I needed the Swedish passport because, as we all know, everyone in the world can go to Palestine except Palestinians. Unfortunately, she died in 2012 before I became a Swedish citizen. When I was in Syria, my family and I couldn't talk to my grandmother because there is no phone calls between Syria and Israel. And because Gaza Strip is occupied by Israel, it has the same international phone code. Finally, after several attempts, I managed to flee Syria and the Syrian dictatorship at the beginning of September 2008, and I arrived in Sweden. As soon as I arrived in Stockholm, I started looking for my grandmother's mobile phone number in Gaza Strip. It turned out that she didn't have a mobile phone, but she had a house phone, and I was able to get the number. I started communicating with her immediately and talked to her almost every day. What a great woman. She could hardly hear because of her age, but she was a great storyteller with a brilliant memory. And she exceeded my expectation of her in every way. She told me hundreds of unnecessary stories about countless cousins of mine in Gaza Strip that I didn't know and never met and knew nothing about. I'm quite sure that she told me a lot of unimportant family details about at least 100 cousins named Muhammad Almadhoun, Ahmed Almadhoun, and of course Ali Almadhoun, and so on. I'm not kidding. Hundreds of cousins named Muhammad Almadhoun. Then I had idea. I bought another mobile phone and I started to calling my grandmother's house in Gaza Strip, and with the another mobile phone, I called my father in Syria. And I put the speakers of both phones on so they could talk to each other. So my grandmother could talk to her son. And my father, after all these years, talked to her. And it worked. Suddenly, less than 3 months after I arrived to Sweden, Israel launched a war in Gaza Strip at the end of 2008 and the beginning of 2009. And the first things they did was to bomb the telephone tower, so the communication with Gaza Strip was cut off. I was no longer able to call my grandmother, and for a long time, I didn't know whether she was alive or had been killed in the Israeli bombardment. And it took a long time after the Israeli war in Gaza Strip ended for Palestinians to rebuild the towers and restore communication. Then I reached her, and I heard her voice through the wires. She was speaking with a voice full of pride, as if she has just emerged from victorious battle. Her voice was clear and sharp, loud and enthusiastic, full of power and energy. She spoke in heroic tone, as if she was Yasser Arafat himself. Or actually, if she was speaking to Al Jazeera, where they broadcasting her live. Her words rang out with unwavering clarity. We are here. We are steadfast. We will continue to resist. The Jews cannot break us. Oh, you mean Israelis, not Jews? What do you mean? She replied. I think you are trying to say is that the Israeli cannot break us, not the Jews. What's the difference? She asked. There was a moment of silence between us. And I remember thinking, why should a woman born in Palestine in the 1920s be politically correct by Western standards? Why should she know that there is something called anti-Semitism in Europe, that Europeans persecuted Jews, that in 1930s, in a country called Germany, in a distant continent called Europe, there was a party called the Nazi Party, led by a man called Adolf Hitler, and that European Jews were fleeing for their lives, and that they come here to her homeland and took over her beautiful house in Ashkelon and throw her to tent in a refugee camp, and then they come back again and took her children, throw them in another country, and left her alone. Why should a woman born a century ago, who never had the access to or opportunity to education as we have, know European history, when the intellectuals in Europe don't know anything about the history of Middle East beyond the cliches, stereotypes, and misconceptions at best? Then I said, forgot it. There's nothing wrong with what you said. Latifa, my grandmother, died in 2012, and I never met her. Latifa, her name in Arabic means cute. Latifa, the mother and the father of my father. Latifa, the most intelligent human being I have ever known. Latifa, the most beautiful, funny, and full of life lady I have ever spoken to on the phone. I didn't see her. And she didn't see Khan Yunis refugee camp wiped out of the map. Khan Yunis camp was completely destroyed, along with the entire Gaza Strip, as a result of Israeli bombing and invasion, and still being bombed as I stand before you for more than a year of war against civilians. Cut. Ghayat Almadhoun, my father, the well-known writer and journalist, ended up in Syria, where he met my Syrian mother, Najia Abu Nabbout, a very beautiful elementary school teacher from Daraa city. They married in 1978, 78, yes, 78. They married in 1978, and I was born on the 19th of July, 1979, in the Yarmouk Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus. Of course, I don't want to give any credit to the occupation. On the contrary, damn the occupation forever and ever. But if it wasn't for the occupation, I wouldn't standing before you now. Because the chance of my father going to Syria and meeting my mother are less than 1 in a billion. What I'm saying is that we are the result of the contradiction of this world. And the thing you hate the most can be the reason for your existence. My poem, Israel, written in 2010, reads, Israel. Without Israel, my father would not have been expelled from Palestine, would not have fled to Syria. He would not have met my mother. I would not exist, and you would not be my lover. Cut. It is understandable that my grandmother wasn't supposed to know about European history, but that excuse didn't or doesn't apply to me as a part of a generation born in refugee camps as a result of that dark history. So it was obviously my father's responsibility to answer the child's question, which revolved around why aren't we Syrians? What does it mean to be Palestinian? Why aren't we in Palestine? And why did the Jews took our homeland? And it was extremely difficult, if not impossible, for my father to explain to 6-year-old that there is a continent called Europe, where there is a terrible concept called anti-Semitism, which is deep, veiled hatred of Jews for no other reason than racism, and that the inhabitants of that continent have systematically persecuted, harassed, and racially discriminated against the Jews for the last 10 centuries. They ended up rounding them in a concentration camps, killing millions of them in gas chambers, and then burning their bodies in huge ovens. And the survivors of these atrocities, with the help of the very Western world that had inflicted the suffering on them, fled to our country Palestine as refugees to save themselves from the white man. And then, with the help of the same white man, in the same Western world, they occupied our homeland, expelled us, and made us stateless. We became homeless, living in tents in refugee camps in foreign countries without any rights, while they now live in our houses built by our grandparents. Can you imagine trying to explain that to a 6-year-old child? Later, I grow older. I grow up with a lot of questions in the air. And in my relentless search for answers, I realized the importance of questions, especially the unanswered one, and the essential role of instability, and how necessary it is for art and literature to have an outsider's perspective, because not having homeland make you are a combination of outsider, exile, immigrant, stateless, vagabond, displaced, nomad, refugee. And that is a way, and in a way, a privilege if you are a writer these days. It frees you from all the chains that tie your hands and the compromises that many writers have to make to maintain their positions. You have got nothing to lose after you lost your country. The only reason I don't hate my country is because I don't have a country, as I say in a poem. God. Born in Damascus to a Palestinian father, I inherited my father's exile from the moment I was born. Later, I had to flee into my own exile, escaping the dictatorship in Syria in 2008 and successfully making my way to Sweden. When the Syrian revolution started in 2011, I was all for it. Yet, physically, I was far away, facing for the first time the fact that I was neither here nor there, but somewhere in the parallel. I am the Palestinian Syrian-Swedish refugee, wearing Levi's jeans invented by a Jewish immigrant from Germany in San Francisco, filling my camera with pictures like a Russian peasant woman filling the pocket with milk from under her cow, nodding my head like someone absorbing the lesson of war. I wrote in my poem, Schizophrenia. in 2015. The destruction of Syria is so painful because all that remains is my memory of that memory. And just as my father's memory is the only proof for him that Palestine is real, my memory has become the only proof that Damascus was real. The destruction of Damascus shook everything in me. When Damascus was there, I could say that any city I lived in was my place, because I knew that one day, when I am exhausted from wandering, like a nomad, I would return there. But when Damascus disappeared, the security I leaned on disappeared, and the stability I used to feel leaked out like water between my fingers. The most bittersweet thing I inherited from my father is being stateless Palestinian. And one of the most bittersweet things about being a stateless Palestinian is that it came with a permanent exile. A stateless child born in Damascus, forced to flee to the Syrian exile into Western one. In this double exile, he was seeking the intersection between the diasporic legacy he inherited from his father and the diaspora he was forced to choose. A Palestinian born in Syria who lost both countries. In this dilemma, he wrote the paradox of this new life through the mirroring of memories. His writing became Diary of Survive, a therapy to heal the inner wound and to translate into poetry the reality in which he suddenly found himself. He's no longer Middle Eastern, and he will never be 100% Western. He is a new species, exiled from the exile and living in the parallel. He has become the parallel. In Palestine, they call me the Syrian-Swedish. In Syria, they call me the Palestinian-Swedish. In Sweden, they call me Palestinian-Syrian. Cut. When I fled Syria, I exchanged dictatorship for exile. Although exile is bitter, it comes with the sweetness of freedom. This freedom was the most exquisite thing I had ever tasted, but it came with a Pandora box full of wonderful things that everyone in the West loves these days, as we all know, especially right wings. I am Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, immigrant, refugee, male, and poet. It couldn't be worse, actually. Being unwelcome in a way or another, mixed with the new outsider perspective, forced me to rethink everything, even the most obvious things, including what it means to be a poet. I was able to distance myself from my settled self, from the poetic entity in which I had swimming, with the calmness of one who knows the consequences of swimming against the current. I abandoned all the poetic tools I had practiced in Damascus. And this shift forced me to reshape my poetic tools and adopt them to the new reality, where fear of rolling regime is no longer condition for writing. And the absence of censorship brought about a radical transformation. I no longer had to hide behind symbols in metaphors to escape punishment. I began to rely less in metonymy and less on the tools that once protected me. The shift was more linguistic. It was about uncovering the hidden and the deep voice as a poet, and I began to touch what I believe to be the essence of poetry. The essence of poetry, I believe, is the voice of wandering souls, testimony, the testimony of witnesses denied the right to testify. It is through the eye of outsider that the poet can see the world with clarity, and to be out of a place is imperative for the poet to fully embrace his role. I wanted my words to be direct and indirect, simultaneously, to pretend not to care and suddenly touch the wound, to whisper intimately in a woman's ear and speak the truth to power at the same time, to entertain and to criticize. But criticism is not expected from the foreigner, because exile came with a lot of bad love, with good intentions, in the name of tolerance. I am very much against tolerance. Tolerance by its very nature implies a hierarchy. One person of group is placed above another, decided to tolerate them from a position of superiority. No. No one should tolerate another. People must be equal. Tolerance also implies gratitude and requires you to be grateful. And I don't want to be grateful to anyone or anything. Gratitude also distances you from criticism. And I think the right to criticism is one of the most important tools for measuring freedom of expression in art. It's also good to remember who has been forbidden to criticize throughout history. Natives against colonizers, slaves against masters, women against patriarchy, Jews against Nazism, and Palestinians against the Israeli occupation. The moment an immigrant criticizes something, the white man says, "Go back to your homeland." Exactly. That is my dream, to go back to my homeland, Palestine. I'm thinking of Palestine, the country that invented God and caused the slaughter of millions in the name of God. The land of milk and honey, where there is no milk and there is no honey. The Holy Land, for whose sake we have embarked in holy wars, where we have suffered holy defeats, from which we have been displaced in a holy displacement, for whose sake we have lived in a holy refugee camps and died a holy death. I'm thinking of Palestine, and I'm haunted by the voice of the Sheikh, who repeated a line from the Quran whenever I question him. "Oh, you believe, don't ask about things that, if they are made clear to you, will cause you trouble." And I continued to ask, which is further from Earth, Jupiter or the two-state solution? Which is closer to my heart, a soldier from my country or a poet from my enemy's country? What is the worst thing Alfred Nobel did? Dynamite or Nobel Prize? I wrote in my poem Schizophrenia in 2015. Cut. Being physically removed from the place I knew allowed me to see the poetic potential differently. Writing took on more existential significance, something I hadn't realized while I was in Damascus. where every word measured for fear of the infamous punishment Syria is known for, disappearance. During the 30 years I lived in Syria, one of the most brutal dictatorships in history, under the fear that one day I would disappear, I had developed tools to fight totalitarianism, how to survive, and how to remain sane. It is important to clarify that freedom of expression is absolutely essential to me as a writer. That is why I fled Syria in 2008. However, I don't take democracy in the West for granted, but believe in the role of allowing differences in opinion in maintaining healthy democracy, and that art in a free environment is the greatest enemy of totalitarianism. And as we all know, words have no consequences here in the West. Or at least that's the way it's supposed to be. Or so I thought at first. Let's say I was wrong. I never expected to find myself fighting totalitarianism in democracies. But here I am in 2024, for the second time of my life, fighting censorship, but this time in the Western world in general, and in Germany in particular. And it didn't work, especially since the tools I developed to fight totalitarianism in dictatorship were not designed to fight totalitarianism in democracies. Germany has learned so little from its history. On the contrary, it's brutally suppressing our democratic values. We are going through difficult and frightening time in a country known of its dark past, witnessing a period of systematic suppression and culture cancellation on a massive scale. Everything has been cancelled and banned, from poetry reading and book launches to the cancellation of award ceremonies and music events, exhibitions, film screening, lectures, and literary seminars have been closed. Academics have been forced to resign, and even culture centers have been shut down. It is important to note and understand that the list of cancellation is the largest in the history of contemporary Europe that occurred in one single year. The frightening thing is that the cancellation that happened in fascist Europe in the 30s were predictable, because that's what you expect from totalitarianism. But what's happening now is happening under democracy. What is even more frightening is that if we look at the public list of cancellation in Germany, we see that about 22% of the 180 artists who have been cancelled are Jewish. Taking into account the fact that there are about 83 million people of Christian background in Germany, and that there are at most 200,000 Jewish. This means that if we mathematically compare the number of white Germans who have been cancelled to the number of Jews, the ratio is 830:1. In other words, the percentage of Jewish artists cancelled compared to German artists is 83,000%. This means that Germany officially cancelling the Jewish again. And here we were again. And here we are again, witnessing the Germans for the second time of their history, government and people, independent and non-independent, right and left, groups and individuals, public and private, in systematic, organized, collective action, are doing everything to censor, silence, cancel, and erase the voices of a group of people, to deny their rights, to treat them as enemies, and to dehumanize them. In addition to the fact that we lost Palestine because of the dark German history, which caused us to pay our homeland as a compensation, solution, and a resolution for the Holocaust perpetrated by its white supremacists, we found ourselves as the largest Palestinian community in the world outside the Middle East, living in a highly toxic atmosphere in an unwelcoming society that systematically label our identity as a dangerous, our quest for equality as politically incorrect, and our longing for freedom as a threat. I was one of the first artists to be cancelled in Germany. The highly respected organization House for Poesy in Berlin, with whom I have involved in many readings and projects for over a decade, had decided to cancel the launch event of a poetry anthology, Continental Draft Das Arabische Europa, which I co-rated and edited for them. House for Poesy sent me an email on the 12th of October 2023, 5 days after the 7th October attack, informing me that they had cancelled the event. I would like to clarify that they sent me an earlier email on the 5th of October, 2 days before the attacks, confirming that everything was ready for the anthology presentation. Now, in the time of writing or reading, we are more than 180 artists who have been cancelled in Germany, and we have decided to make this public. Most of us no longer involved in any activities, have lost most of our income, and are unable to understand or deal with this phenomenon in democracy. Please have a look at Archive of Silence online. It should also be noted that the 180 cases documented in the Archive of Silence are only those in which the artists agree to speak publicly. Many of them decided not to go public because if they did, the rest of Germany would see it and would be accused of anti-Semitism, and they would lose their jobs and careers. I would like to add that I consider my cancellation to be one of the most serious cancellations that have taken place in Germany. And I will explain why by using the example of the cancellation of the award ceremony for a novel by the acclaimed Palestinian writer Adania Shibli at the Frankfurt Book Fair, as we know. Adania Shibli's book is a book that has something to do with Palestine. It tells a story based on a real event that took place on the 12th of August 1949. And that was exposed by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz in 2003. The novel tells what happened to a Palestinian girl who was gang raped by 20 Israeli soldiers, then later executed and buried in the desert. What makes my cancellation one of the most serious is that the anthology I co-rated, unlike Shibli's book and the work of other artists, had nothing to do with Palestine, but included poems by 31 Arabic poets living in Europe. It is a part of series of anthologies published by the House for Poesy. The previous one was the Persian Europe and Black Europe. The anthology has no politics, no mention of the occupation, and no hatred or anti-Semitism to be accused of. There is nothing to link the book to Palestine or criticize Israel. And I have made no public comments. The seriousness of my cancellation lies in the fact that I was cancelled because of my identity as a Palestinian. And only because of that, which is exactly what Germany was famous for in the 30s, cancelling people because of their identity. Finally, we must bear in mind that the freedom we enjoy is not a given and should not be taken for granted. Rather, it has been hard-won through significant effort and struggle, as the case for the majority of the people around the world. It is therefore essential that we continue to fight to preserve it. I want to end this text by reminding you that the people used to say, and always say, we didn't know what was happening in the 30s. I have told you all this because I want you to leave your zone of interest and bear witness to the time in which we live today. Now, you know. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was long. Wow.
You have water?
Yeah, thank you.
So, as we talked before, you said to me you will probably flee when I ask you questions, as you that is your reaction to questions. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for
and thank you for sharing your reality that must be very harsh at the moment in Berlin, Germany, Europe.
Yeah, the Western world in general, mix the freedom of Palestinian with their own history. So it became very tough for them to separate, and for them it's so difficult to understand that it's the opposite. When you give the Palestinian equal rights, the conflict will end. So if they do this only for 2 months, the problem will be finished.
I have been following the news in a German newspaper, and I have seen how very different the attitude is, although we have a lot to learn in this country as well, obviously, but of course, especially in Germany, it is very difficult to probably acknowledge that the situation with Israel is beyond any human rights situation. Actually, I prepared another question, but please ignore it if you feel.
No, I really trust you. I would love to hear the question. Yeah. I will tell
it is
something also about Germany later.
It is connected somehow. Yeah. That's why I want to delve into this area. In one of your poems, I think, I'm limited to the Dutch versions of your books. Ik heb een afgehakte hand voor je meegenomen. I have taken a cut-off hand for you. What is it in Arabic?
The same. It's a very terrible title, but
you write about not being present. I am not able to be present. It's correct, right? That it's in this book,
Yeah.
or is it? Yeah.
In the one before
In
also,
the one
I cannot attend. Yes.
Yeah, I
know
cannot
exactly.
attend. I cannot attend.
Yeah, it is the
And-
title of my third book also. It's not. It's different, the titles between
Okay.
language and language.
Yeah, what struck me there is that the not being able to attend or not being able to be present in reality, in fact, in maybe the environment that we share. You claim in these cyclus of the poems as a state of being. So it's actually being elsewhere is what you are. And I think you mentioned it or suggested in a small way, is that not being there may be a way to speak from those who cannot speak anymore, maybe from the dead or from death. And I was thinking,
that's from the city poem. Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I can
it's
tell.
of course-
I can tell something. I can tell something. So it's all began when I discovered that I am coward.
you are a coward.
Yeah, I discovered this after 2011. In 2011, the Syrian revolution began, and all my life I thought that if a revolution began, I will be participate in it. So I saw the people going from all over Europe, the Syrian and Palestinian, go to Turkey and smuggle to Syria and fight and shout freedom in the street, and then they got bullet by sniper bullet and died. And I was not able to do that. I was really afraid from death, and I hide it for a while. But then I say, you need to face it. You are coward. You don't deserve the freedom if the people got it. We didn't got it. Sadly, the dictatorship remained in Syria. But I was not able to take the real stand and go to Turkey and smuggle to Syria. And because everyone I know did that is dead. So I wrote the book. I wrote the poem, I Cannot Attend. And it was the title of my third book in Arabic, La أستطيع الحضور, I Cannot Attend. And in that poem, I put lie after lie, lie after lie, that why I couldn't come. Like, I have a fish tank and need to be fed, I don't have. My wife is pregnant in the 11th month. First, I don't have wife, and there's never happened in history woman was pregnant for 11 months. So it's all lie after lie after lie.
Yeah.
And then I say, I'm dead. I'm really dead. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So
And the poem also becomes smaller. So every new poem becomes smaller, right? So
yes, exactly.
in a way
Because
yeah.
every time you lie,
it becomes smaller.
but in fact, that only the cover of it. But in reality, I love life. And yes, I love freedom, but also there's another way for me to be able to communicate with myself and the world. And the Quran mentioned the lie about the poets in a very problematic way. So in the Quran we have a section called the poet section, the Surah al-Shu'ara, the Surah of the poets. And in the end of it, the God says something. They were very important, 2 lines, they were very important on shaping my life. So the first line say, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. Don't you see, about poets we speak, the God say to the believers, don't you see that they traveling everywhere? And I was paperless, and I was dreamed of traveling. And I say from the first moment I read this, I say I will be a poet. If the poet are traveler, and also it's problematic because it's have the 2 meaning, traveling in the reality and traveling in the meanings. And then the most problematic line after it, and he didn't say liars. The God is very polite. If we consider that he's polite, he say, and don't you see that they say things and they didn't do it? Like, yeah, you know, that they speak a lot.
Yeah.
And they don't do. So I was, and you don't know if this is positive or negative, by the way. And this is what is make the Quran very problematic. So I was fascinated by the idea of traveling, not being in the place, and the idea of the Bedouin. The essence of Arabic poet is the Bedouin who travel alone in the desert with his horse or camel, crossing thousands of kilometers. You don't hear even one sound, only the sound of your horse, and you navigate through the stars. And because that most of the stars in the world have Arabic names, and the Arab were able to occupy the Mediterranean very fast. Even if they didn't have the knowledge of the sea after the empire, we occupied the Mediterranean very fast because we were able to navigate. And I was so annoyed when I understand that I born in 1979. And this like a modern city. I born in Palestinian refugee camp. You should know what is Palestinian refugee camp. It was high buildings when I born. It was in the center of the city of Damascus. So when they built it in 1948, it was tents. When I born, it was really like small Manhattan. Yeah. Now it's bombed and it's not exist anymore, bombed by Assad regime. So I was very annoyed from the idea that I am the poet who are not Bedouin. He didn't have the freedom. He's connected to everything around him. But and then I might make my plans to escape that, of course. Did I run away from your question?
Kind of, but in a great way.
You know, Churchill, Winston Churchill, he says something. One of the journalists, he went to interview Churchill, and in the moment he opened the door, he said for him, "Welcome. What is your question for my answers?" He was already reading the answer. And I mentioned Churchill because he's our colleague. He won Nobel Prize for Literature, as you know. So he's not as a politician.
No, but I think you touched upon an even more interesting point that I also have a question about, but I'll try to ask it in a different way now, is that you say that you are a coward as a poet, but of course it is very difficult to know, right? Like when is poetry not enough anymore in life, or is that something is it enough to say you are a coward, or yeah? I think it's a question for everyone who is maybe not involved in joining a revolution or protesting in the streets. Is it enough to talk about things, or yeah? Of course we can. Yeah.
In some things, I have a courage in many things in life. Yeah, I do. But when it's about death, it's different.
Yes.
I remember the death happened for me in life once, and I was in Holland. I was on the stage with Anna Victor in 2016 in April, beginning of April, and went outside the stage, make my mobile on, and then I got the call that my brother Ghassan got killed in Syria. And then I disappear. And then I wake up at our friend Chris Coleman's house. Jorgen, he make me ticket, and I went back. And the ticket I remember was to Stockholm with transit in Copenhagen. And when we are towards Copenhagen, and I didn't understand yet this has ever happened to me. And then I understand something very important changed all my life. And I want to say to the pilot to stop and let me go off in the middle of the air. I understand how wrong my life is. My brother got killed in Syria, and I am in Holland. Instead of going to Syria or to any country near from Syria, I'm going further to the north, to Sweden. It was so, like, I can't describe my feeling, how terrible this. And I was thinking all the time how I will inform my mother to understand how difficult is the war. I am in Holland, informed about my brother. My mother, she didn't know. And I'm responsible to tell her, this is the worst thing happened to me in my life. And I call her, but I couldn't. So I didn't tell her. Later, her sister told her. So the idea of going more far from Syria, from that moment, all my life changed. I really became vagabond. I began what to say in Arabic. It's very difficult to translate this, even if it's everywhere in my book. Running forward, al-hurub ila al-amam. So it's like when you have, let's make it easy in politics, like you have problem in your country, in economic or something, you are the prime minister, so you make war in another country. So I began to make like this, pushing the problem forward and run away, and push it forward and run away. And then the Syrian began to arrive, and I welcomed them in Europe, take them to the migration board, help them to fill. They are really nice and good. 6 months after that, it takes 5 to 6 months, they got the PTSD. What's going on with these people? Why they are coming very normal and take 5, 6 months, and then post-trauma stress disorder? And then I began to understand that the people need to settle. During war and bombing, they have a lot of adrenaline and surviving skills. But when they settled and they have normal life, peaceful one in Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, then around 5, 6 months. And then I began to be afraid that the PTSD will hit me because of what happened to my brother and all this, and the destruction of Syria, and I lost hundreds of friends. And then I say, okay, if the people settled and then they got the PTSD, so let's be on the road.
Let's be on the road.
Yes, and I was traveling like 320 days per year, and the 30 days, it's only to change the bags and wash the clothes. So I was traveling all the time. And I convinced my ex that this is right, and she said yes, a little bit. So yeah, and we were traveling, and I was sure in the moment I will settle, the PTSD will come, and then the COVID.
Oh.
And I was so afraid. The world was afraid from sickness and death, and I was afraid from that I will be settled now, and the PTSD will come. And guess what? I was wrong. Nothing happened. So I was sitting in the lockdown and waiting for the PTSD, and no, I
didn't come and get you.
Didn't. Thank God.
But now I realize something, because when we spoke before your lecture, I asked you about the wolf, how it seems to pop up in various ways and throughout the different books that I've read from you. And you said, I don't know what the wolf is or why it arrives in my work. But I think, is it possible that the wolf might be also a figure, a symbol of always traveling, not being able to be catched by borders or nationalities, and also, of course, an in-between figure. Like it can be
it's more
fairy tale.
complicated, and it's related to our culture, mythology, and religion.
Can I ask some? Is the wolf, because in the Netherlands we have one. Did you know that? We have one wolf.
Oh.
And we have around 13 commissions trying to deal with this single, although it has.
So this is what we can say, a lone wolf, really.
It has children now, and everyone is confused about it.
No, we have a lot in Sweden.
Is there a lot in Sweden?
Yeah.
But the wolf already was a figure for you in before in Damascus.
So it is a combination of a lot of things. I remember the Standard, the newspaper in Belgium.
Yes.
When they wrote about the book, me and Anna Victor, it was 2 big pages, and the middle, it's a huge photo of a wolf.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like, and then I said, okay, these people really catch you. The wolf, yes, it's appear everywhere in the poem. And the lone wolf, the fighter, the wounded wolf, and also the dictatorship.
And the monster.
Yes, and the monster. A man I met in a cafe in Damascus was eaten by the wolf. And I know I'm speaking about a friend who was killed, arrested and killed under torture by Syrian regime before the revolution. So eaten by the wolf, it's mean killed by the dictatorship. And also, if you read the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, little different than in the Quran. In the Quran, we have the same stories in the Old Testament, totally. Solomon, Joseph, Jacob, Abraham. Anyway, the story of Joseph in the Quran, when his brothers throw him in the well, and they went back to Jacob, he asked them, where is Joseph? They say for him, he was eaten by the wolf. Yeah, in the Quran. And then he was so sad, he understand there's something wrong, and he became blind. And then, you know, they find him and they took him to Egypt, and the Israeli sons grow, and then they met him in the, later on he became a great man in Egypt before they go back to Palestine. So in that moment, eaten by the wolf, it's really shaped a lot of my thinking. How to could hide everything, and they show him a shirt full of blood, fake blood, of course, yeah. So the wolf is very important because it is always also related to the lone fighter, the person who is leaving behind everything and go to the places where he's the most weak and vulnerable. I don't know. The things we do in art I really understand some of the things I write, but it takes times until I figure out this me.
Of course. You even say somewhere, these are not my poems,
Yeah,
which I found very impressive and also understandable in the context in which you write, where you feel responsible for speaking for people who cannot speak for themselves, if they are dead or alive. Is this a poem you have in English with you? Sorry, we didn't prepare this, but
we speak about the city or what?
when it's about when you say these are not my poems.
Yes, it is the city. It is from my third book. Which part?
It is in the beginning,
Yeah.
kind of the third one, more or less.
Okay.
And it ends with capital letters. These are not my poems.
Yeah. Can you read the first line? It is.
This is in Dutch.
Yeah.
Ik heb niet genoeg licht. I do not have enough light.
Yes, exactly. I was in the right page. Okay.
Because
you want me to read it in Arabic?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And then maybe I can, because I don't have the English version here. Only the Dutch. So it would be good if could you find the English one?
Do you have the English book? Yes. It's easy.
Okay.
Yes. So let's go to the city. Yes, 65.
And of course, I mean, you probably all understand this, but to see it written that these are not my poems while writing it, I think it's incredibly powerful.
Okay. I don't have enough light. This.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So do you want to start?
Yes, of course. I didn't read this poem for a long time. This is a really old poem. ليس في جعبتي متسع من الضوء لأوزعه على عميان مترلينج. الأسوار تحيط المعنى داخل روحي كما تحيط المدينة ذكرياتي. أهي روحي المؤمنة، أهي جسدي الملحد. سأعترف الآن بخطيئتي الأصلية. إن جميع قصائدي التي غرزتها في لحم أيامكم كسكين صدئة ليست قصائدي. لقد سرقتها من المنسيين وفاقدي الذاكرة، وجمعتها من أسرة المشافي البيضاء وأنين المعذبين. إنها ذاكرة النساء المسفوكة أمام ذكورة الله، غرغرات الذين ماتوا بردا في منتصف الأغنية. إنها الحلم حين يكون مجردا من الحالمين. نعم، إنها ليست قصائدي، إنها ذكريات متحجرة لأناس عاشوا قبل زمن سحيق. لا نعرف أسماءهم ولكننا نحملهم في ملامحنا الباهتة. أمنيات لم تتحقق وضحكات مستعملة. إنها ليست قصائدي، إنها أنفاس الغرقى والمشنوقين، والأرواح التي سالت من ثقوب صغيرة أحدثتها البنادق. إنها ليست قصائدي، ليست قصائدي.
I don't have light enough in my quiver to distribute to Maeterlinck's blind men. Walls enclose meaning inside my soul as the city encloses my memories. O my believing soul, O my heretical body, now I shall confess my original sin. All my poems, which I planted in the flesh of your days like a rusty knife, are not my poems. I stole them from those who had been forgotten, or who had forgotten, collected them from white hospital beds and from the groans of the tortured. They are the memory of women sacrificed before God's masculinity, the gurgling of those who have died of cold in the midst of the song, the dream when it is devoid of dreamers. Yes, they are not my poems. They are the petrified memories of those who lived in times long gone, whose names we don't know, but whom we carry in our pale features. They are wishes not realized, second-hand laughter. They are not my poems. They are the breaths of the drowned and the hanged, and the souls that flowed out through small holes made by the guns. They are not my poems, not my poems. I think we said we would end this with reading a poem, but I would just like to ask you one more thing.
Do we read we, yes?
Sorry?
The poem we, or?
We could still do that if people are still up for it. But I want to ask one thing, which I have been very curious about this. You living between and with several languages that span so many countries and cultures. You mention it in one of your poems that you feel like a translator. And I suppose it's not only a translator from one language to the other. You mentioned somewhere that you also have to translate the images, and you mentioned it in your lecture that you left a certain type of writing behind that made sense in Damascus, and you started writing in a different way here, which is maybe also a strange kind of translating of your life. And I was wondering, where you are now with that feeling, and do you use several languages sometimes in the original poems? Because I don't know how the translators deal with it, but yeah.
So in general, like let's think how I think. I think in a very weird way when it's about poetry. But for example, let's say this Dutch book, okay?
Yeah. So
these have not even one single word written by me.
They're not even your poems, we know that.
I'm honest, I swear in Allah. There is not even single word in this book written by me. I wrote these poems in another language, totally different. So every single word written in this book is written by my great translator, Duke Bebringer. So this is the fact. This is the logic I see the whole world. So in the moment I understand that this is not my poems in that sense, then everything have become another meaning to me. This book is a new window. It's open to another place. And it's very problematic because in the translation, before I will answer your question, in the translation, people lie a lot, especially when they introduce somebody. Like they say, oh, he was this great novelist and he's translated into 20 languages. There is a lot of lie in this. Tell us what happened. You are translated into 20 languages and they discover in other country how bad writer you are, for example, because a translation is a spotlight put on you or taken outside you forever. Let's say you have a wonderful poet in Holland translated into French with very bad translation. The French people read him, they close it, done for him. He will not be translated anymore to France. Like, it's a very problematic thing. So I myself, I write for the 475 million Arabic reader in 22 different countries. And I enjoy that so much, especially when I see how my Swedish friends are jealous with 9 million people, one book fair, where I'm flying from Beirut Book Fair to Casablanca Book Fair, I sign book, and then I go to Dubai Book Fair, I sign my book, and then I go to Cairo Book Fair party and sign my book, and my Swedish friend looking to my social media. It is really like joyful to be Spanish or Arabic or English or French or all these countries who have like. But I began to rethink about this, and I discovered it is not about that. It's not about original and non-original. Holland, I have been translated to many languages, but Holland have a strange relation between me and Holland. So in Holland, it was the beginning of, I began to rethink about these things, especially when my Dutch friend, they began to call me the local poet. So in the beginning, it was funny that I'm a local poet in Holland. But then they printed this agenda for the end of the year where there is text and they include me. And 3 years ago, they make a book about how Dutch writers write. And I was there. Seriously. And then
That's
I said,
fantastic.
okay, this is a serious thing. And then I began to have been in a communication with young writers. And I began to understand that I affected some of them. And this is only
Or
happening
Juka.
Yeah, some. Like at least I know too.
Yes.
So yeah, and then it made me to rethink about the things that you could throw something, and yes, when it's crushed in the wall of the languages, differences, and culture and background, it's crushed like this. Some go back, but some go through.
And you make a mark.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with a good translator like Duke, with something secret we don't know what is it. There is secret.
Yeah.
We don't know what is the relation between me and Dutch people with this love. So I succeed to be able to feel for the first time in my life that I'm translated in a language, but people understand what I'm saying. Like it was really, really
That's very
like,
special.
especially like in English, I have a great translator, but I can read the text and check after her. So this is in general, if we think about how I think about writing in general. But if we go deep about the languages itself, as I always say that I really believe in what the Swedish poet Transtromer say, the Nobel Prize winner, when he say that he don't care about translation because he feel that his poetry in Swedish is a translation of his feeling. So any translation of his poem, it will be translation of translation. And then I say, oh, this man saying this, it make me think about, yes, like I have a lack of ability to say many things, but I have a very strong power to say the same things in poetry. And I understand that poetry is to re-say the things in a way. And I began to think about my way of writing. You want me to tell you about
Yes,
it?
please,
Yes,
please.
how I write. So what I do, I don't write anymore. I write. So what I do, I open the, and I would love if you try this. Really, it's a really good way of writing. I will tell you my secret. So you open the computer and you begin to say, okay, a glass of water in the table. There's some books inside it like this. After 5-6 lines, the unconscious mind began to come slowly. In the line 7-8, you began to write something different. You continue, you finish the text, you deleted the 7 first lines about the glass on the table, and then you put it in a file, you close it. And it's really fermentation, it's real. It's like a grape juice. You come back after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it depends how much alcohol you want in it. When you open it, mostly you will not remember it. And then you do 2 things. Deleting and erasing. Delete and erase. And we began with delete. You began to read the text and you find this part, it didn't work here, but you feel it that this is for another poem, because when you work it, your mind remember everything and work in all. So you take that part and put it in the other poem, copy paste. And then this part to this poem, this is up. And this, it didn't fit any poem, but it's interesting. You put it in a file alone to make it a new poem. You finish the deleting. You close the file, you don't want to close it, you come back to it, and then you make erase. And erase everything you delete. You put it in the trash, and then you make empty the trash. It's gone forever. And it's so joyful because it's have destruction. Yes, seriously, I don't know what is about destruction and our human being. It's so joyful, especially when you regret something, but you can't go back, and it's give you the ability to continue writing. You finish the erase, you close the file and leave it, fermenting little. Then when you come back, you do rewriting, 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 rewriting.
It's that easy.
Until you feel the text is finished, then you make editing and send it to publish.
Okay,
And
thank you.
try it. I promise you, the result will be great. Delete, erase, rewriting, 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 rewriting,
I will try.
editing, and send to Jürgen Mas.
I will try, and I would like to open up your trash can, but maybe another time. Shall we finish maybe now with, after we've had this advice for how to write poetry? You made it seem easy. Thank you.
Yeah. Should we read the poem we? Because I
Yes.
wrote the poem we while my grandmother was alive in Gaza. When they cut the telephone when they bombed the telephone tower, I wrote the poem We.
Let's
And yeah, and I really would love to. So from 2008, and in that time Israel killed 1,400 people, 900 of them were women and children. And it was like, what? 1,400? This number now, it's like a joke.
Can I ask something? Maybe it's better I do first the English so
Yeah.
that we can finish with your voice.
Okay.
Because you are
Yeah.
the most important. So it's supposed to be in this book, right?
Yeah, I think it is from in the beginning. Woman, we is page 12 or 13.
Yeah. It's gone.
Yeah,
13 you said?
12 or 13.
12 or 13.
Yeah.
We.
Yeah.
We who are strewn or strewn?
You could
True.
let's read it in Dutch.
Maybe- Yeah,
let's read it
okay.
in Dutch. Yes, we're in Holland.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we read it in Dutch.
But are there people who do not speak English?
Does anyone don't speak Dutch? Okay,
Yeah.
I give up. I will
Yeah.
read in Arabic. Yeah.
We who are strewn about in fragments, whose flesh flies through the air like raindrops, offer our profound apologies to everyone in this civilized world, men, women, and children, because we have unintentionally appeared in their peaceful homes without asking permission. We apologize for stamping our severed body parts into our snow-white memory, because we have violated the image of the normal, whole human being in their eyes, because we have had the impertinence to leap suddenly onto news bulletins and the pages of the internet and the press, naked, except for our blood and charred remains. We apologize to all those who did not have the courage to look directly at our injuries for fear they would be too horrified, and to those unable to finish their evening meals after they had unexpectedly seen fresh images of us on television. We apologize for the suffering we caused to all who saw us like that, unembellished, with no attempt having been made to put us back together or reassemble our remains before we appeared on their screens. We also apologize to the Israeli soldiers who took the trouble to press the buttons in their aircraft and tanks to blow us to pieces, and we are sorry for how hideous we looked after they aimed their shells and bombs straight at our soft heads, and for the hours they are now going to spend in psychiatrists' clinics, trying to become human again, like they were before our transformation into repulsive body parts that pursue them whenever they try to sleep. We are the things you have seen on your screens and in the press, and if you made an effort to fit the pieces together like a jigsaw, you would get a clear picture of us, so clear that you would be unable to do a thing.
Thank you. So as I say, this poem from the 2008. نحن المتناثرين شظايا الممطرين لحما نتقدم بالاعتذار الشديد من هذا العالم المتحضر فردا فردا رجالا ونساء وأطفالا لأننا وبدون قصد منا ظهرنا في منازلهم الآمنة بلا استئذان نعتذر لانطباع أشلائنا في ذاكرتهم البيضاء كالثلج ولأننا خدشنا صورة الإنسان الطبيعي الكامل في أعينهم لأننا وبكل وقاحة قفزنا فجأة على نشرات الأخبار وصفحات الإنترنت والجرائد عاريين إلا من دمائنا وبقايا أجسادنا المتفحمة نعتذر من كل العيون التي لم تجرؤ أن تنظر في جراحنا مباشرة لكي لا تصاب بالقشعريرة ونعتذر من كل من لم يستطع إمهال وجبة العشاء بعد أن فاجأته صورنا طازجة على التلفزيون نعتذر عن الآلام التي سببناها لكل من رآنا هكذا بلا تجميل أو تقطيب أو إعادة جمع لبقايانا وقطعنا قبل أن نظهر في الشاشات ونعتذر أيضا من الجنود الإسرائيليين الذين تكلفوا عناء الضغط على الأزرار في طائراتهم ودباباتهم لتحويلنا إلى قطع نعتذر منهم عن الصور البشعة التي تحولنا إليها بعد أن صوبوا قنابلهم مباشرة إلى رؤوسنا الطرية، وعلى الساعات التي سيقضونها الآن في عيادات الأطباء النفسيين ليعودوا بشرا كما كانوا قبل تحويلنا إلى أشلاء مقززة تلاحقهم كلما حاولوا النوم. نحن الأشياء التي رأيتموها على الشاشات والصحف، والتي إن اجتهدتم في جمع بقاياها كلعبة البزل فإنكم ستفوزون بصورة واضحة لنا، واضحة لدرجة أنكم لن تستطيعوا أن تفعلوا شيئا.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.